There's been a large earthquake in Taiwan, close to the city of Hualien. So this is in the kind of eastern part of Taiwan. It's an earthquake of about magnitude 7.2. It is a reverse faulting earthquake. So by this we mean it's an earthquake that allows the land to get shorter, right? So it kind of allows horizontal shortening, and it's actually a very common type of earthquake to occur within Taiwan. Taiwan is a very earthquake-prone region, so this magnitude of earthquake, magnitude 7.2, is in some ways expected. There was an earthquake of similar size in western parts of the island back in 1999, the Chi earthquake, which was, also had a reverse faulting mechanism and a similar magnitude. This earthquake here, close to Hualien, is actually in an area called the longitudinal valley. So there's some coastal mountains on the very eastern edge of Taiwan. And then there is the central range of Taiwan, which are the mountains that cover most of the rest of the island. And that longitudinal valley is very narrow. It's long in a kind of north-south direction. And that is actually a very seismically active zone. There are significant earthquakes, similar size to this one in the 1930s. Also in the 1950s, there was a pair of big earthquakes, magnitude 7.1. And so, this is an area that has repeated large earthquakes, both in recent decades and also further back in history. Why do earthquakes occur in Taiwan as a whole? Why are there so many? Well, Taiwan is really at the edge of the continental shelf of Eurasia, right? So the sea between to the west of Taiwan is shallow water. It's got a submerged part of the continent, and what you have offshore is a subduction zone, right? So you have oceanic crust, which is kind of going underneath the margin of Eurasia. And that subduction zone, where you reach Taiwan, you basically impacted a range of submarine volcanoes into the margin of Eurasia. And this is meaning you go from subduction to actual mountain building. Everything is colliding and crashing into each other, making this mountainous range. And so where that collision has happened, you have Taiwan, right? That's why you have the mountains that are happening there. And so you've got a full plate motion, 8 centimeters per year or something, that is occurring between the oceans off to the east and the continent of Asia to the west. All of that is occurring across a very narrow area. Taiwan is quite a small island, right? And it's having that entire plate motion occurring across it. Most of the island is mountainous. Those mountains are there because of past earthquakes, and so you have quite a widespread earthquake hazard across the whole of the Taiwan region. It looks as though it was onshore. From what we understand so far, of course, when earthquakes have just occurred, we don't understand that much of the science behind them, right? Exactly where they were, exactly what kind of faulting occurred. It looks as though it was at least predominantly onshore, in which case the scenario hazard is perhaps less. I've already seen footage, however, of widespread landsliding. You have steep slopes within, a lot of the island of Taiwan is steep mountainous terrain. And I've already seen footage of landsliding along that eastern coast, over where the north-south highway is that runs down the longitudinal valley. So landsliding is a big risk associated with any large earthquake in Taiwan. In the earthquake of 1999, the Chi one that we've mentioned before, again, landsliding was a big effect, a big secondary hazard from that earthquake. Not just the shaking from the earthquakes themselves, but what they end up doing to the hill slopes around. Because earthquakes happen so regularly in Taiwan, and there was the big one in 1999, but then there have also been repeated earthquake, damaging earthquakes over the past decades, that the emergency services are actually very well prepared. These are almost expected events, right? They know that earthquakes of these kind of sizes will occur. They know that areas such as Hualien, which has been demonstrated in past years, is an area of particular risk. And so they're well practiced. And any plans that are put in place are very much ones that are well well organized, well practiced, well thought out, and so both built on evidences of the last years, right? So they have practice, right? And also in terms of starting from a good knowledge of the science as well, right? So in terms of understanding where earthquakes may occur in the future. Certainly, when the 1999 earthquake occurred, they there's been a big program in Taiwan since that time of building resilience for exactly these kind of effects, understanding where earthquakes are likely to occur, understanding what their effects might be, understanding where vulnerabilities might be as well, right? So they're about as prepared as any nation can be for these kind of events. My guess is that in terms of the emergency response here, it will be quite rapid. Of course, there will be damage. Of course, there will be buildings, structures that will need to be demolished, that will need to be rebuilt. But in general, I would say that we'll see. We'll see what happens over these next few weeks. But I think they're going to be in a very good situation to rebuild rapidly and get that part of Taiwan back up and running quickly. This is not the first destructive earthquake we've seen globally over the last year, and so we've seen, in Turkey, Syria, the very large earthquakes there. That was very, very challenging because that was a truly huge earthquake and it caused damage over a very, very wide area, and some of that in areas that were quite rural, quite far away from the large cities, but also it affected some large cities that have grown quite rapidly over the past few decades. And we saw that there were some vulnerabilities there in terms of the buildings and their susceptibility to shaking, right? So that was a really challenging event. We've also seen we saw earthquakes in Afghanistan, Herat, last year, in October of last year. And again, that hit rural villages, and there again the reconstruction takes a long time, and also it affected the villages in terms of loss of life in a really big way, right? So people were made homeless, but they also lost their families, etc. And the reconstruction from that can take a long, long time. So different countries and their readiness and their ability to finance and to get the resources to rebuild really makes a big difference in terms of where an earthquake occurs. It will really make a big difference in terms of how long it takes to rebuild, how much repercussion there is more widely outside the particular, the epicentral zone, the places where there were the specific damage. And so, for this one, let's see. But my feeling is that we've seen damage here, but the Taiwanese are very, very well set up for dealing with these kind of things based on past examples of past decades. The earthquake problem requires some foresight, right? Because of course you need to build for something that might not happen in the next decade. It might not happen in the next century sometimes, right? And so it requires you to take a long-term view and to make sure the buildings are built properly. Codes exist, but also they need to be, enforced, those codes. And also the materials need to be used properly, right? Why do we use a particular grade of steel for reinforcement in buildings? Well, it's because they are the ones that will make sure that building stays upright within a building, right? So it's important at all levels, to make sure that all the materials are correct, that all the builders know why they're building in such a way, right? Why they're following these rules, and that those rules are enforced as well as having the rules in the first place. That is what we should be doing, right? If we can build properly, then we can withstand most of the effects of earthquakes. Of course, there will still be loss. Often what it happens is the buildings are built to not be completely undamaged after an earthquake. It's very expensive to do that. Of course, hospitals and critical buildings are built to that level. But often with apartment buildings, they may sustain some damage, but they will stay upright, and they will mean that the people within them will not lose their lives. Okay, so that's often what is done. But if we build properly, we can we can withstand some of the worst effects of earthquakes. There's a commonly used expression, which is that earthquakes don't kill people, buildings kill people, right? And this is what we should always be keeping in mind. Of course, there are surprises. Of course, there are times when things happen that have not been engineered for, have not been prepared for. The 2011 earthquake, Taroko, of course, led to a large loss of life. But in that case, it was actually the tsunami. The buildings were largely withstood what was a huge earthquake in that case. But then there was the inundation afterwards, and this was what led to most of the destruction and the loss of life. But in general, places like Taiwan, Japan, parts of the United States, Western United States are quite resilient to buildings. Loss of life will still occur, damage will still occur, but they do their best to try and minimize the effects at least.